Hello everybody, Phil Weston here with a really brief HITFILM tutorial. A while ago I did a different tutorial and a bunch of people asked me how to make this effect. Now this tutorial is actually for the blast of that effect. The sigil kind of fire thing was done in a previous tutorial that you can see here by clicking on this button. But for this one, we're actually going to be focusing on the blast, like I said, and it's super easy to do in HITFILM 2 Ultimate. So you could probably use Express as well, but you might not have all the functionality. I can't give you a definite answer because I don't have Express, but for those with Ultimate, feel free to follow along, and if you have Express, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. So the first thing we're going to do is just pull in our footage. Now I already did this once, so you'll see a bunch of things here, but I just went out into my back porch and filmed this. And I'm also going to assume that you have some basic knowledge of HITFILM 2 and post-processing and visual effects in general. Here is the actual thing that we'd used. It's just me here with a painted Nerf gun. So what we're going to do is we're actually just going to take a section of this closer to the end. And you can do this in the timeline as well, but this is how you're supposed to be doing it, from what I understand. So I'm just going to trim this to the basic area that we're going to be using. This will start it here, that's fine. And I'm just going to drag this into the timeline. And I'm going to right click and make this a composite shot. You can also do this just from the project media window here if you like. Alright, so here is the clip. Now it's really important when you're doing something like this, if you're using any prop that actually doesn't fire or have any kind of physical changes on it, is you really have to kind of act it out. You can kind of see, I'm going to turn this down a little bit. You can kind of see I, react. Actually, I'm going to start it about here, but I really react to the kickback that's not there. So, boom, right there is where I react to it. So we're going to try and just remember where that starts, which is right about here. And just try and remember around here, there's no way of making a marker from what I understand, but this is where it's going to start. Now the first part is you're going to want to track the barrel here. It's pretty easy on this one because the barrel's bright orange. I didn't finish painting this. But what we're going to do is we're just going to hit the tracker, under tracks, hit that button to make a tracker. This is a really basic motion track where I am just going to put the cursor right on the center there and just actually going to track backwards and forwards since I'm right at the part here where the impact starts. So I'm going to track backwards with that. We'll stop it right there. And you can kind of see that's where we started tracking backwards. So I'm going to go back to that spot, and I will track forwards. Now you don't have to track all the way through, just through the shot, just through where it's where the blast is actually going to take place. So now that we have that tracked, we can take a quick look, just make sure the tracker stays on where we want it to be. And then we're going to hit the new layer button and make a new point, which is a lot like nulls in After Effects, and name this tracker. Go back to the tracker for your actual footage, and under Apply to Layer, select Transform, and select your tracker and apply. Now, this is very basic stuff. It's very much like After Effects, so this shouldn't be too hard. When you go to track, it automatically puts you in this layer mode rather than your viewer. So just click back on Viewer. Now if you select your tracking point, you should see it tracking the actual footage where you want it. And that's what we want. Now this tracker is very important because everything is going to be linked to this. So we're going to start with the blast. Now there's a lot of different ways to do it, particle effects and things like that, and we're not going to worry about that so much right now. We're just going to use the muzzle flare tool. So if we go into our effects and type in gunfire, select that and bring it in above your tracker. It's going to add a 3D camera. It'll actually ask you if you want to do it first, but I've already disabled that. And then what you have to do here is match this up with where the tracker is. So you're going to match the position and the rotation. So right now I'm just using these handles to do that. I'm going to go over to Controls, Transform, and the Y rotation just to turn this, which is really cool because having a 3D muzzle flare allows for a lot of options when you have gunfire, and if you don't have the right stock footage, this will work out pretty well. So with this, and you can go back and adjust this as we go through, but I think this is just about right. So with that where it should be on the gun, I'm going to parent this to the tracker. So now as we move forward and backwards, you see that the let's turn this back down so it goes a little faster. Turn this off. You can see that this already follows the gun where we want it to be. So we're in good shape. So now we want to get this to look the way we want. And the way that we get that blast coming out is we're going to go to our core flare, and we're going to use the scale, length, and a few other things here. So I'm going to raise the scale a little bit, and then I'm going to shoot the length up really far. And you're going to see that the flare kind of dissipates because there's a certain amount of particles that it's using, the HITFILM 2 is using to make the flare. As a matter of fact, you might be able to see that in the preview. Yeah, you can see these are the particles that it's using. We want to get the flare length pretty far, and then we're going to increase our primary number, which kind of fills in the particles for the flare. So that's good, but it's kind of coming out like a spout, and we don't want that. So we're going to take the length taper and lower that, so you kind of get this radius, is starting to match this. We can even adjust the radius here a little bit as well. And let's see here, the radius taper is going to adjust how thin or thick the beam is. So you're going to use that for whatever situation you happen to be in. And right now I'm feeling like this is not pointed directly in the right direction. If you were to draw a line from the butt of the rifle to the barrel, it's actually a little bit on an incline. This kind of goes down. So I'm just going to grab this handle and move it down a bit to kind of compensate for that. All right, so we've got our beam. So far, it's not doing much, but it's in a good placement. I'm going to change the color to, we can do, I don't know, how about somewhere in between here? That would be kind of cool. So you can kind of see it's looking a little bit more like what we want, but it's still very even. And the reason for that is that right now we're just using the main core flare. If we go back to the preview, you can actually see that all this stuff here, these side flares, are kind of getting hidden. So what we're going to do is we are going to reduce the radius here. We're going to increase the secondary number, which is kind of like this fuzz along the edge, just to give it a little bit more variation. And then with the side flares, I'm just going to mess with this a bit, just like the same way I did with the previous one. I'm still not happy with this angle. So let's see, we can go with our scale a bit, make these pop, maybe a little bit of the length, not too much, a little bit will go a long way. So it's already looking pretty cool. Now what we also want to do is we want to mess with the jitter on both the primary and secondary, just to kind of get a little bit of noisiness around here. And we've got this. Now it's looking a lot better, but it's still not what we want. So as with any muzzle flare type of or gunfire effect type of thing you're using, we are going to adjust the seed. So we're going to keyframe it at the start, and then anywhere after that, and after the gunfire actually shoots, we're going to change it. What that's going to do is it's going to actually change how this looks. Right now it's going kind of slow. I'm going to actually adjust that a bit more. Now that's looking a lot better. However, we don't want it to just start like that. So what you could do is you could use the rate of fire, or you can do the active or not kind of thing. But what I did for mine, kind of to make a build up, is knowing that, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to turn this off for a second. Knowing that it starts here, just about there. I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to keyframe my scale and my length. I want this over probably 5 or 6 frames to really activate. So with those keyframes, I'm going to hit this forward a few frames. Looks like that's where the apex of this beam is. So I'm going to keyframe these again. And it looks like I started it a bit too early. So going down here, you can see this is under the core flare, the scale, and the length. And go back to when the blast first starts, which is just before the kickback. So probably about here. Let's select these 2 keyframes, move them to the timeline indicator, and hit 0 on both of these. Now, here's a good thing. That's only for the primary flare, so the core flare. So we're going to have to do the same thing for the secondary flare. And an easy way to do this is to copy all of these, go down to your core flare, paste them there. And if we look down here, it's got the same thing going on for the scale. The length, not so much. So the length looks like it's stuck at this area, but once the scale goes up, you kind of have that look, which is cool. Now, this beam isn't going to be on all the time, so we only have it on for a bit, so probably about to here. Now, again, yours can change however you like. It really is up to the artist and the scene. I'm going to have this be a bit of a pulse. So at here, at this point, this is where I want it to stop. Now, what I could do is just keyframe these again and put them back to 0, but let me show you what happens with that. And right now, I'm just going to mess with the core flare. So I'll keyframe the scale, and I'll keyframe the length, and I'm going to 0 both these out. Now that looks cool. It looks fine, but it's not necessarily what we want. I'll actually do the same thing here, 0 that out. Because what happens is, because we keyframe the length, the blast comes out this way, and then as you can see as we move forward, the blast kind of gets sucked back in, and that's not what we want. So we're just going to delete the length keyframe, and the blast kind of just dissipates like that. And one of the reasons why I wanted to keep the jitter high is you get all this extra particle stuff there, which looks pretty cool, and you can change that if you like or not. So we've got the basics of here. It looks kind of cool, and this is perfectly fine if that's all you want to do. But I think there's a little bit more we can do here. Now, I'm a big fan of Japanese animation and stuff like that. And whenever there's a really big gun that goes off, usually they have the barrel of the gun kind of collects all these particles from space before the blast really goes off. And you can look at, I don't know, anything from Robotech to anything by Masamune Shirow, or some space pirate, Captain Harlock, for that. But for this, we're going to do 2 things. First of all, we want to make sure that we know where the blast actually starts, which is about here. And I'm going to turn off the flare for now. Or actually, let's rename this as blast. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to do 2 things. First thing is I'm going to add a black plane. I'm going to call this flare. Bring it right above the blast. It doesn't really matter if it's above or below. I'm going to change this to add. going to add a light flare, and I'm going to go to hotspot position and parent it to the tracker and zero these numbers out. So now it's in the same place as where our beam starts. Not really loving the color, so I believe I used golden artifacts. And I'll take this other handle and move this. It's kind of cool. Now, one of the things you want to do is we don't want to have this on all the time, so I'm going to set this up how I'd like it to look right before the blast starts. So I'm going to change the color to somewhere in here. Mess with the saturation a bit, and then my intensity I'll bring up maybe a little bit of the scale. I'm going to keyframe these guys. I'm going to go back a little bit, probably about here, and I will zero these out. And what that does is, as you're playing, you'll see that the flare starts to grow, and that's when the blast happens. And then I'll actually, if I can keyframe these right about here while the blast is still going on, it'll kind of keep this level of scale consistent. And then as it gets down to here, I'll zero them out so that it kind of goes up, or it increases. This section stays constant and then decreases. So if we turn on the blast while that happens, you can see that it starts up and then boom, and then it's done. You can mess with that and customize the flare any way you like, just to kind of get what you need for the scene. I personally think this is kind of cool, so I'm going to keep that. But we're not done. So, turn the blast off again. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a particle system. So I'm going to type in particle, take the particle simulator, pull that in. I'll turn the flare off for now. And to kind of achieve that look, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my particle system. I'm going to set the shape to circle, or I'm sorry, sphere. Set the trajectory to implode. I'm going to use the toggle for sphere. I'm going to attach this to the tracker layer. So as you can see, it's right there, and we didn't do anything else. You can just kind of see it following the tracker there, which is fine. We're going to want this to stop once the beam starts. So if we think that's where it starts, and I'm really kind of ballparking this, stop there. We're going to increase the radius pretty large. I'm going to set it to boundary, and if I go into particle systems general, you can increase the particles per second, and I'm going to raise the emitter attach all the way up so that as this moves, it's not trailing when the tracker moves, it's just staying with it. So to take care of the timing of this, it's not going to be starting all the time, so it's going to start probably around here. And I'm going to go to the active. I'm going to keyframe this, move forward one frame, and keyframe it again. Go back to the first frame and turn active off. So it's starting there. These are moving in, and it's still not the right speed. So I'm going to kind of push this up pretty fast. So we go down to movement. I'm going to increase the speed by a significant amount, so that these are moving a bit faster as they're coming in. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, this is a cool trick. I'm not sure where I heard it first, but if you go to your regular movement, zero out your scale, go to your movement variation and slowly increase the scale here, you're going to get a wider variety of the size of this particle. You only have to do it, it's only 50% right here, and so you can kind of see you're getting a deeper kind of variation of particle size, which I tend to like rather than setting the particle size in movement all the way up. Additionally, with this particle system selected, if you go to lifetime, and scale here, I'm going to have it start at 0%, and then by depth probably up to 150, 200%, so that as the particle dies, it's pretty large. Now, one thing you have to be careful of is if you take a look at some of these particles here, they started here, came in and moved past the center point and kind of left it because the lifetime, and they're larger when they shouldn't be. So I'm going to decrease my lifetime on this. So if we go back to movement, I'm going to say probably half a second. Let's take a look at that. Could be probably a little bit longer. Probably 0.75 seconds. You can kind of see they're largest in the center, and that's kind of what we want. Now this part's a bit tricky. I don't want this to be collecting energy as it's firing. So it's firing when the kickback happens. I'm going to stop the particle system before that. So this is we already have a keyframe for when it starts, but if we stop it just as the kickback happens, these particles along the outside are still alive, so they're going to keep coming in. So I'm going to go back a little bit, and I'm going to stop it here. That way these particles still have time to get to the center, but no new particles are being born, and boom, that happens. Now the ones that you see in the center there, you're not going to see them in the final because they're going to be covered with other effects. So we don't want our particles to look like this. So what I'm going to do is go down to Appearance and change the texture to Built-in. I'm going to align to motion so they're all facing the center. I'm going to go down to, I believe, Spark Star. Now this doesn't look great right now, but if you motion blur this, you see there's a bit more variation. They're coming in a bit more, but additionally go to Properties, Advanced, Motion Blur, change this to 360, Shutter Phase to 180, and your samples to 40. I believe this was something that was on Film Riot, and you can see they've got more of that streak coming in. Additionally, I'm going to change the color to something like what we were using. You can mess with the alpha a bit, just to kind of get something that you're happy with. Also change your blend mode to add, and there you go. From here you can go back and change the scale if you think they're too large or small. These look a bit large actually, so going back to movement variation, I'm going to decrease this to about here. So far so good. Alright, let's look at that with the flare. And we'll look at it again with the flare and the blast. Not bad. Not bad at all. So, what do we do next? Well, there's a couple things. We can, one of the things I see a lot of people do is when there's a visual effect that generates light, you don't want to just focus on that visual effect, you want to focus on the surroundings. So as you can see, there's a big white wall behind me, there's my face and my arm. So a very easy way to kind of address this is I'm going to go to where the apex of this blast is and assume that this is the brightest light generating point in this piece. So what I'll do is I'm going to hide my particle system flare and blast. I'm going to duplicate my background footage, call this BG light. I'm going to set this to add by going to layer properties, blend mode, add, and it's very bright here, and that's what we want. We're going to take our pen tool and we're just going to trace a little bit around where on the back wall this would be affecting. Alright, we'll adjust this. Doesn't look like much now, but when we select our mask, feather it out, and let's see, we can also mess with the transform a bit just to kind of darken it so it's not, I mean, you could easily blow this out, but got to keep in mind that the particles, the flare, and the blast is going to make this whole area super white, and you don't really need that. You want to have some kind of contrast between the blast and the background for it to look good, or else it's just going to look washed out. Here, I'm just going to keyframe the opacity. This is at the start, or I'm sorry, this is at the apex. And then just so that I know what's going on, I'm going to turn my blast back on and move backwards to where it starts. Actually, not just the blast, the flare as well. And go right to before the flare really starts, right after it starts, and assume that this is when the light is starting. My opacity for the background light is still selected, so I'm just going to move that down so that as we move up, the background starts to light up. And then after the flare is there, I want it to kind of go back down. So this is the end point. So I'm going to keyframe the opacity here. And keyframe the opacity while the blast is still going on, probably about here. And let's see here, if we go back down here to opacity, and move to the end, and zero this out. So as you can see here, the lightness at 0 here, it goes up, stays a bit, and then goes back down. And that's great for the back wall, but that doesn't address my arm and my face and body over here. So an easy way to deal with this is just to duplicate the background light. It already has all the opacity keyframes set, and I'm going to change this to body light. I'm going to delete this mask, and this is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated, because you're going to want to go in and you're going to want to trace over the affected areas. If this is the center of the light, it's going to be affecting my face and this area, not so much anything behind me. So with the layer selected, hit the pen tool, and I'm just going to really roughly trace some of this out. You really don't have to be exact for something like this because we're going to feather it anyways. You could, if you want, take the time and really kind of, do this right. For this, I'm just going to do it this way so you can see what I'm going for. So we've got our mask. Let me select the regular tool. We've got our mask. Now we're going to need to animate this. So with your mask selected, hit Path, and then I'm at the end of it right now. This is where the light stops. So I'm just going to move back every so many frames and just move it back in position. Oh, I lost it. Here we go. As you can see, the shape of my body changes as I go along, so you might want to go through some of these intermediary areas and fix this a bit. For example, here, you move this forward to kind of fit, maybe blur it out a bit more, feather it out a bit more rather. Well, this will do for now. Now, one thing you might notice is that it's really kind of hard to see the effect. You can kind of see it, but not a whole lot. So one thing that I do is that if you're considering this the source of the light, it's a lot closer than this wall is. So you're gonna, my face, my body is closer to the source than the wall is. So instead of the opacity only reaching, what is it here, 63%, I'm going to raise this a bit. It's up to 90. I'll go to the next one, say 90 again. And then it goes down to 0. So that's not bad there. You know, it's pretty easy. You can do a bunch of other things. You can use certain displacement filters, which you'll have to do some pre-comping with and things of that sort. You can mess with your masks a bit more. You can easily change the type of flare here, the properties of the actual beam. Add some sound effects, do some color correction. For example, I can throw on a grade layer. I'll throw on anamorphic lens flares. Screen is good. Streaks, I'll say horizontal. Put on the right-hand side, turn off vertical pivot, blur this a bit, raise the threshold. Throw on maybe CineStyle. Take down the color adjustment to keep some of the original color. Kill the grain and the vignette. Adjust the S-curve a bit. Oh, not there, but you kind of see. Turn this back up to full. And there you go. It's pretty easy. This took me less than, 15 minutes to do. And it works out pretty well for most cases. You can use this for any kind of, air quotes, energy weapon. Really easy to set up and add some variation, some displacement, some additional particle systems, things like that, and you're good to go. If you like this tutorial, feel free to share it with your friends, use it yourself. Hit me up and show me what you've done with it. You can use the comments below or on my website, and thanks very much for watching. Take care.